Before I begin the installation of the antennas and periscopes and other pointy bits that go around the conning tower, I need to finish the installation of the components that go underneath the hull. At this point, all that is left to do underneath the hull is to install the screws. Type VII submarines have two counter-rotating screws, one on the port and the other on the starboard side of the hull. Since these are counter-rotating screws, they are mirror images of each other, so I need to keep track of which is the correct side for each of these screws to be placed on. The moldings for these components are okay, there's a little bit of flashing, but everything lines up properly, so there's nothing really to complain about. In fact, when it comes to comparing these components to other components on the sprue, they're actually quite good. In general, I found the quality of the moldings for the components on the sprues for this kit to be pretty poor. After a little bit of cleanup with the file to remove the excess plastic and flashing, I brush paint the screws with Revell Aquacolor number 93 copper. When it comes to components that are this small, there is really no point in going through the effort of trying to airbrush them. Brush painting them is going to work just fine, you won't be able to see the brush strokes. I've also found that these Revell paints brush paint better than the airbrush. That's just another reason for me to stick with the paintbrush. After the paint has dried, I slip the screws into position. There's just enough space for the screw to get pushed past the control plane and onto the propeller shaft, and once in position, I glue it in place using extra thin plastic cement. Before the plastic cement sets, I take the time to carefully position the screws to get them into the correct orientation. Once I'm happy with the orientation of the screws, I set the model aside for a few minutes to give the glue some time to set. Now that the screws are attached, I can continue working on the components around the conning tower, that is the snorkel and two periscopes. As is common with awkwardly shaped components like this snorkel, some of the injection points are in awkward places. This meant that it required a bit of manhandling to get it cleaned up, and while I was doing that, I snapped it in half. I found that a bit strange. It's almost like this plastic is a bit more brittle than I'm used to. Anyway, it happened, so it's something I'm going to have to fix. After that snap, I was a lot more careful with the two periscopes, and I was able to clean them up at least without doing any damage. Anyway, moving on to painting. The periscopes both have the same color scheme. They have a white bottom and then a very dark gray top, almost black. To create this paint scheme, first the periscope is painted in white, then taped off, and the tip painted in the dark gray. The reason why I painted the periscope using an airbrush is because firstly, I found that white is very difficult to brush paint. It doesn't go on very nicely. It's much easier to airbrush it in my opinion. And then I airbrushed the dark gray on the tip because I wanted to have a nice crisp line where I had masked it off. For the snorkel though, it's only going to be painted in one color. This is Revell 77. So that means it's not white and I don't need to create a masking line anywhere. So I have no need to airbrush it. So in this case, I just brush painted and I get a perfectly good result. Before I start installing these plastic components, I also want to finish with the photo etch construction. So I'm going to build this antenna. For this antenna, I ran into a bit of a problem. It seems to me that it's actually not possible to construct this antenna in the way that it is indicated in the diagram. You see, it seems as though in the diagram it assumes that the metal has zero width, which of course is not the case. It might be very thin, this sheet of metal, but it has some width to it. Because of that width of the metal, it pushes the sides of this antenna away from each other and things then just don't quite line up. What you see me doing here is folding the photo etch as indicated in the diagram, but once that's done, the metal mesh that sits in front of these bars stands off from the supports at the side of the structure. You get this huge gap that looks really ugly, so I decided to take the antenna apart and try and construct it in a different way. When flattening out the antenna, it did cause it to break apart. That's not unexpected. The metal was stressed when I folded it up into that shape, and flattening it out does cause that to happen. Wasn't really concerned about that because I did want the components to be loosened so I could reassemble them in a different way. After playing around for a while with this mesh and 3 bars, I realized there's no way that you can put the mesh in front of the bars and not have a large gap behind them that will look really strange. So I decided that I would introduce a bit of an inaccuracy here and instead install the mesh behind the bars. Yes, I'm now assembling this incorrectly, but it will look better, and when it comes to something small like this, I think the aesthetics are going to be more important than 100% accuracy. With the mesh now behind the bars, assembly is actually quite simple. I use a little bit of medium viscosity superglue to tack the components together, and then I reinforce their bonds using extra thin superglue that I apply with a wire. Once the antenna is glued together, I prepare a 1mm long 0.5mm diameter section of brass wire and glue it to the base of the antenna. The antenna is then painted in the medium grey and the base of the antenna painted white. Now that all the components are assembled and painted, installation can begin. Starting with this antenna, I apply a small drop of medium viscosity superglue to the base of the antenna and then attach it to the top of the conning tower. Next to the antenna goes this small plastic vent. This vent was originally attached to the top of the conning tower, but at some point I knocked it off, so I'm just reinstalling it now. From this point onwards, I'm going to have to be a lot more careful with how I handle this model, so it should be safe from now on. Next, the forward and shorter of the two periscopes is installed. This one needs to be inserted into a very small hole at the front of the conning tower. It's glued in place using extra thin plastic cement. The aft and taller periscope is then installed. This one has a much more comfortable hole to be seated in and is in general easier to install. As with the forward periscope, it is also glued in place using extra thin plastic cement. The last of the antennas to be installed is this loop antenna. It's just a simple piece of flat photo etch, so I glue it down using medium viscosity superglue. The last component that I'm going to install is the snorkel, and I'm going to install it in the up position. You can also install it in the down position, but I'm going to install it in the up position to just give you something else to look at, because it is a submarine. There's just not a lot of stuff on it. It's a small model that's very simple. With the installation of the snorkel, we are now getting very near the end of this build. The last components that need to be installed are the anti-aircraft guns. I'm going to be doing that in the next video. If you don't want to wait for the scheduled release of videos and want to watch them when they're uploaded, consider becoming a channel member by clicking the join button below. If you would like to support the channel, like and subscribe. And as always, questions are welcome in the comments. Thank you for watching. Cheers.